All right. G'day, and welcome to Pints with Aquinas. Name is Matt Fradd, and I thought I would do a little live stream today in which we go over a Summa article, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, but especially for those of you who are new to Thomas Aquinas, you want to read Thomas Aquinas, you're a little confused about how he writes, especially in the Summa Theologiae. That's what we're going to go over today, and we are going to take a look at 5 things we can learn from the structure of the Summa article. So that'll be really fun. Thanks for being here. I want to let you know a few things. First, I'll be interviewing Father Mark Goring at 12 today. We're going to be talking about what on earth is going on in Canada and the Catholic Church. I also need to let you know that we just released the very, very first video of the Spanish arm of Pints with Aquinas. It's called Tequila con Aquino. Patrick Quinlan is the host of that show, who grew up in Mexico and so is a very obviously fluent Spanish speaker. I'll put a link in the description below so you can click through. We're really, really excited about this. I have a whole marketing team that's working alongside of him, that's releasing clips and promoting it and things like that. The goal, of course, the hope is to help our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters, especially in the United States, because that's where I'm from, right? That's my interest. Not be kind of sucked out of the Catholic Church into other different sects and groups, but to remain within the Catholic Church. So that's really cool. And then also, I want to let you know that we just released a t-shirt. Here's what it looks like. Introverted but willing to discuss Thomistic metaphysics. So I'll put a link in the description below. Right now they're $13. You can buy t-shirts and hoodies and all those sorts of things. So people have been asking why we don't have more merch. Well, now we do. And then very finally, given that many people have said, well, I am interested in discussing Thomistic metaphysics, but I don't know much about it, I put an ebook together called You Can Understand Aquinas. It's in the description below. It's completely free. It's about a 15-page PDF in which we go through Aristotelian metaphysical jargon. And I think once you kind of understand that, reading the Summa, and we're going to talk about that today, is going to be a heck of a lot easier. All right, so there's some stuff for you. Okay, all right, let's do this. All right, so Summa. Okay, I think it'll be best if I just kind of show you it, and then we'll talk about it here. All right, so I've also put a link in the description to the Summa Theologiae online. Summa Theologiae, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, is Thomas Aquinas' most famous work. Let me see if I can do this. It means a summary of theology. Okay. And the Summa Theologiae is broken up into 4 parts. So you have the first part, the first part of the second part, second part of the second part, third part. You have the supplementary section. These parts of the Summa are then broken down into treatises, all right? So general topics like creation and the simplicity of God. Those treatises are then divided into questions. Those questions are then divided into articles. And the article is really the main chunk of the Summa, and so that's what we want to look at today. So let me open this up. I don't know why you can't see my face when I do that. Something went terribly wrong, I think. But so long as you can still hear me. Can you hear me when I do that? Sorry about that. I thought that you'd be able to see my beautiful head, and I would be able to... But... how do I make that happen? I'm sorry, that really should have been done prior to this, shouldn't it? All right, you let me know if you can hear me when you saw that copy of the Summa. I'll throw it up there and then we'll chat. Cheers. Yes. Okay. Sounds like you can hear me. Good. Okay. That's lovely. Thank you so much. All right. So... this is what the Summa looks like, okay, at least online, Summa Theologiae. As I say, you've got the first part here. You can see that prima pars, first part, and then the next one down, prima secundae partis, first part of the second part of the second part, third part in the supplementary section. Once you go into, say, like the first part, then you have, as I say, these treatises, the one God, the Blessed Trinity, etc. Under this main heading, you then have questions, okay, like existence and eternity and these sorts of things. Let's click on existence, okay, the existence of God, right? That's the question. And then you have 3 articles. So let's just take a look at one article today, all right? So the Summa Theologiae has 5 structural parts, okay? Number 1, you have the question, which is this one here, whether God exists. Next, you have the objections, which Aquinas sets himself. He's got 2 here. Usually he has 3, but sometimes as many as 12, I think, in the Summa I saw once. The third thing he does is the sed contra, on the contrary. Then the main bulk of the article, number 4, is the I answer that, or the respondio. And then you have the reply to the objections. Okay, so those are the 5 parts of the article. I'm going to say that just one more time because I think it's really important. And we're going to learn 5 things from it. Peter Crave pointed this out, and I thought it was brilliant. Okay, so you've got the question, you have the objections to the point he wants to make, you have the sed contra, on the contrary, and that's usually just 1 or 2 lines. We'll get into that. Third, you have the respondio, the I answer that part. And then fifthly, you have the responses. Okay, so first of all, these articles are stated whether God exists, okay? Not, I don't know, like what is God like? If he was to ask a question like that, then the Summa Theologiae would be a bazillion pages. But he's asking like whether God exists. So the answer is going to be yes or no. So every article is formulated like that. Whether this, whether that, okay? So for example, whether the existence of God is self-evident. Like, is it or isn't it? Article 2, whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. Can it or can't it? Okay, whether God exists. Does he or doesn't he? And so it's kind of like a pre-packaged debate in that sense. We're trying to get down to a yes or no answer here. Okay, so after the question, you have the objections, right? And it's important to realize that these objections are put really well. And they're not sort of feelings, they're not just opinions, they're arguments. And that's important, I think, because often when we are dialoguing with people, the people we're dialoguing with sometimes don't know what an argument is. Maybe you don't know what an argument is. I mean, before I studied philosophy back in the day, I guess I didn't really know what an argument was. I remember saying things like this. I was talking about pornography once, and I said that pornography emasculates men, degrades women, and destroys marriages. Okay. And I remember saying that, and then somebody said, okay, but what's your argument? And I thought to myself, I just made it, didn't I? But of course I didn't. What I made was 3 statements. Pornography emasculates men, degrades women, destroys marriages. Okay, those are 3 propositions, claims to knowledge. An argument is how I arrive at that proposition. Those are 3 conclusions, basically. So, like, what is your argument? And so often when we argue with people, they'll say something that they maybe think is an argument, because often we don't really talk about arguments in the proper logical sense today, but what they're giving is just a feeling. Like someone might say, well, I just couldn't live in a world without purpose. It's like, okay, that's fine, but that's like a commentary on your psychological state, Or if you say, well, I'm an atheist and I don't know, I don't have an argument for God's existence necessarily. I don't really see why people would want to believe in God. I don't know, something like that, you see? So it's really important that we come up with actual arguments, and then the Summa, Aquinas, does that. And these arguments are put really, really well too. That's the other thing that's neat about this. So if we look at whether God exists, for example, look at this first objection, right? Again, this is an argument against the position he wants to make. He's taking them really seriously here. This one here. It seems that God does not exist, because if one of 2 contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. If therefore God existed, there would be no evil discoverable, but there is evil in the world, therefore God does not exist. So you see, this is basically a syllogism. He's saying if one of two contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. What you mean by God is infinite goodness, right? But there's evil in the world. So it's an argument he's making. And you notice that the argument is put forth, I think, very sympathetically. Okay. The next thing he does after the objections is what I've referred to as the sed contra, or on the contrary, right? Now, this is usually an appeal to authority. So he'll be quoting the scriptures, or he'll be quoting a church father or somebody else. Now, obviously, Thomas Aquinas understands that appealing to authority is the kind of weakest kind of argument. He even addresses that in the Summa Theologiae. But he realizes that we need to not dismiss all that's come before us, and that we can learn what's come before us. And obviously, as a Christian, the revelation of God in sacred scripture is what we have to receive by faith, okay? So he'll do that. So here's the objections, and then, okay, but that here's on the contrary, and then he'll state an authority. Okay, the next part is the bulk of the Summa. And this, when I say the bulk of the Summa, the bulk of the articles, and that is the respondio. That's when he begins with, I answer that. And this is where Aquinas gives basically his own opinion. Now, one way to do this, one way to read the Summa Theologiae without kind of getting bogged down with the questions and the objections and the sed contra and the responses, is you could just read the Summa and just read the respondios. You could read the question, whether God exists, and then go directly down to the respondio, the I answer that, right? So, for example, here, you would go, whether God exists, and then you would skip this for the sake of brevity and getting through it, and go down to his respondio, right? Because after the respondio, after his answer, he's going to reply to the objections. Okay, and then, of course, he replies to the objections. Okay, now there are a few things that we can learn from this, and I'm drawing this from Peter Kreeft, because Peter Kreeft is fantastic. He says that, when we're arguing with somebody, when we're reasoning together with somebody, we really don't want to skip any of these 5 structural parts, in the Summa. If we're dialoguing with someone, there's a point to each of these 5 parts that we can learn from, okay? First, he says, if our question is vaguely or confusedly formulated, our answer will be 2. That's a really good point. If our question is vaguely or confusedly formulated, our answer will be 2. So if I say, does God exist? And I don't even know what I mean by God. Or maybe by God, I mean a man in the clouds, kind of like Zeus, who has a ton of power. Okay, it's really important that we understand what we're saying, and when we're engaging with somebody, we understand what they mean by the words that they're using, and so we're saying the same thing. All right, this is obviously really important. If our question is vaguely or confusedly formulated, our answer will be 2. So sometimes when you're engaging with, say, I don't know, a Protestant, not to pick on Protestants, but, Protestants and Catholics might go back and forth. It's important to say, I think, I did this debate with Cameron Bertuzzi recently on praying to the saints, although it turned out he agreed with much of what the Catholic Church teaches. I didn't know that at the time as we got into the debate. But he brought up the issue of soul sleep, the idea that either the dead prior to the general resurrection are unconscious or just kind of don't exist during that period in some way or another. And so I said to him, okay, so is this your main objection to praying to the saints? Do you think soul sleep is a valid thing? Or are you just saying this is one option? I think it's really important to kind of narrow down, what is your point? What's the point you're trying to make? If soul sleep was off the table, would you then accept the intercession of the saints? And is that the one thing, holding you back from that? Should we focus our energy on that then? Okay. Now, the second thing we learn is if we do not consider opposing views, we spar without a partner and pour the air. All right, so this has to do, of course, with the objections. How many times have you won a debate in your head? I know I've won many debates in my head. Different times I'll about to engage with somebody on a particular topic, and I'll think, well, they're going to say this, and I'll say this back, and then I'll really get them. And how will they respond to that? They won't be able. They'll probably say this. Okay, but then what you find is when you actually engage with somebody, it's a little more tricky than that. And so it's important that we engage opposing views, not sort of what we think they would say, but what they would actually say. Catholics are guilty of this, just like everybody else is guilty of this. We come up with maybe a straw man of what the Protestant would say, what the atheist would say. And, it resembles it, but it's not rigorous and nuanced enough to be taken seriously. So there's that. We have to take our opponent's objections seriously. We have to consider opposing views. Otherwise, we're just sort of arguing with ourselves. Third thing we learn from the sed contra, right, that's where he quotes an authority, is if we do not do our homework, we only skim the shallows of ourselves, right? Many brilliant people much more brilliant than you and I, have lived prior to us and have written on these topics. We should consider what it is they've had to say and why it is they've had to say it. If we don't do that, then all we're doing is sort of drawing from the well of our own personal reflection, maybe the reflection of our contemporaries, which may or may not be good. Time has not yet decided. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that time does. It gets rid of the junk, doesn't it? How many novels will be released this year that no one will ever know about in 20, 50, 100 years from now? But when we look back in history, we see these great works from philosophers and theologians, and the very fact that they have survived the test of time means that they have something worthwhile to say, and so we can learn from that. Okay. Okay, the next thing Kraft says, something we can learn from the structure of the Summa in regards to the respondio. He says this: if we do not prove our thesis, we are dogmatic, not critical. So in other words, you got your question straight. You look at the opposing views, that's good, and then you look at what an authority says, and that's it. And you don't really think it through. You don't really try to understand why they say that, why the church teaches that, why a saint would say that. You just sort of go, well, that's good enough for me. And for some of us, that's just going to be how it is because we're busy and have lives to live and we're not smart enough to get into the ins and outs of every bloody debate that's taken place over the course of church history and prior to the church. But if we want to engage with people, it's important that we not be simply dogmatic in the sense of accepting it because somebody else says it. We want to be kind of critical. And that's important. I've heard Dr. William Lane Craig, speaking of Protestants, say, if you're struggling with the faith, take one issue. What is that? The historical Adam and Eve, or the resurrection of Christ, or the inerrancy of Scripture, or even just kind of like the reliability of Luke's gospel, right? Often when we're struggling with things, they sort of remain in the shadows, and there's a sort of multitude of them in the shadows, and we don't really know how to wrestle with them. Well, he says, okay, well, pick one. You might not be able to take them all on, but pick one and chase that into the ground until you feel deeply satisfied. Because he says that in his experience, when he's done that, when he's taken a topic and really devoted a ton of mental energy and research into it, that when he finds out that the Christian answer is satisfactory, that strengthens his faith to then continue on with great confidence. So that's another thing as we kind of come up with our own understanding of what the saints have said, the fathers have said, and the Scripture has said. Okay, and then finally, if we do not understand and refute our opponents, we are left with nagging uncertainty that we have missed something and not really ended the contest. This is really important. Somebody brings something up, an objection. Okay. Now you might know the general answer, about God's existence or the historicity of the Catholic Church or etc. But do you know how to respond to that specific objection? And this is where great apologists come in. People like, I think Trent Horn is doing a really good job. I think people like Jimmy Akin and Scott Hahn to some degree. He's more of a sort of biblical theologian, obviously, than than an apologist. But there's really good people doing really good work. And so I would say spend some time on that question and do a deep dive into it. All right, so hopefully that helps you sort of understand how to read a Summa article with those 5 structural components and why they're there, what we can learn from them. I have a link in the description below to the Summa Theologiae. It's actually really cool. One thing I like to do is like pour myself a drink, maybe it's a coffee or a beer at the end of the day, and I'll just sit with an article. And you can read an article in 10 minutes, And so it's like a pre-packaged 10-minute debate that you get to read. And it's a really wonderful way of sort of strengthening your intellect and learning to think right. So you might decide to do that. Also, if Aristotelian metaphysical jargon is tripping you up as you read Aquinas, click the link in the description below to the free ebook that we've put together. It's about a 15-page PDF in which I go over all the different sort of metaphysical terms that Aristotle and Aquinas use, like being and essence and these sorts of things, accident and all these things. So click that, read that. Hopefully that'll be a good help to you. Also, I want to let you know again that Tequila con Aquino, the Spanish arm of Pints with Aquinas, just released its first video yesterday. I'll put a link in the description below to that. If you have Spanish-speaking friends that you know and love, please share it with them. And then finally, I'll be on today at 12 Eastern Standard Time to talk with Father Mark Goring about what on earth is going on with the church in Canada. So that'll be great. Hope you can be there for that. Thanks so much. Hope that was a help.